Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another movie review. Just before I get into it, this is a test review because I'm using the built-in webcam for my HP Pavilion 17 laptop. Checking to see how it runs. I'm using my older software to record the stuff because it's a little bit more reliable in terms of pushing record, stop, and we'll see how well it does. And if I like it, I might use this a little bit more often in conjunction with the other thing. If not, I'll just go back to using the normal camera. Anyway, today's movie that I'm reviewing is a follow-up review to the last review you saw, which was Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Today I'm reviewing its 1979 remake, Nosferatu the Vampyre, or as it was called in its original German, Nosferatu Phantom of the Night. I actually like Phantom of the Night better, but Vampire is alright. I especially like its archaic spelling of vampire with an I, with a Y instead of an I. The movie was written and directed by Werner Herzog, who is known for making a lot of documentary films nowadays, like Grizzly Man, something from the Edge of the World, I forget the first part, and of course Into the Abyss. And he's also known for Aguirre, The Wrath of God, if I'm pronouncing the first part of that film correctly. And he is a big fan of the original film. He considers the original Nosferatu to be the best film to ever come out of the German school of filmmaking. With that said, I will say, probably from a technical standpoint, I enjoy his film more. It is a little long in the tooth, and it might not be for everyone, but I enjoyed it. I mean, first film's a lot more groundbreaking and a lot more, and has a lot more historical value than this film does. But it is still a pretty good remake. This is an example of how you do a remake of a film, have it actually be close to the original film, but do its own thing. It's kind of like the Peter Jackson film in a way that it's the same story, just told a different way. And you can tell, like the Peter Jackson King Kong film, that Herzog loved the original film and wanted to do a loving tribute to it. But of course, since he did not have to worry about copyright infringement like Murnau did, he was able to use the original names from the novel and also bring in a little bit more of that story. Not a lot, because it stays close to the original film. But since there's also been a lot of developments in filming techniques in the 50 years since the original film, the story flows a little bit better. Which I think is the film's main strength, is the film flows a lot better. Because there was a couple times watching the original one that was like, okay, that's a little weird, that's a little weird. Given it's a silent film from the early 20s, I let it slide a little bit. Because I'm not going to fault a film for an issue when it was the early age of cinema that if it was made nowadays, it'd be like, okay, that's a major flaw. So I let it slide. With this film, I don't really get that issue, and it also fixed one of my main problems with the film, and that was the character of Renfield. In the original film, it seems like they put Renfield in there just to put Renfield in there. Whereas in this one, he kind of serves a little bit more of a purpose, but it's still the weakest character in the whole film. Other than Mina, who is the Lucy character from the novel, because like the Dracula film with Frank Langella, they switched Mina and Lucy's names. Weird. Now, an interesting little tidbit is that Herzog had a 16-person crew for this film, whereas on Wrath of God he only had 8. And there's actually 2 different versions of this film. One is an English version, which is the one I watched, and the other is a German version. They're not dubbed. It's that he produced 2 different versions at the request of 20th Century Fox. So for all the scenes where there'd be dialogue spoken, he filmed one version in English, one version in German. Now, Herzog personally feels that the German version is more authentic, and watching the film again, I can see why, because there were several moments where it's like, I don't really seem that convinced by the actor, the way they deliver the lines. So it's probably they learned the lines phonetically, or they could speak English, but it wasn't as strong as the German. So when they did the German takes, it was a lot more authentic. That's why I want to get my hands on the DVD or Blu-ray of this film, especially if it has both versions, because I'd love to watch this film in German with the subtitles to see if it's a little bit more believable. Now, despite this, the actors, I think, come across pretty well. Klaus Kinski as Dracula was perfect casting, and the makeup that they put on him is excellent. You could definitely tell it has a lot of inspiration from the original makeup. It's toned down a little bit because Orlok in the original one is a lot more of a monster in the face, whereas Klaus Kinski is kind of like a deformed human if you don't take his claws into account, but you can still tell that he is a vampire that sleeps with rats, essentially. Bruno Ganz plays Harker pretty well. And nowadays, he's most famous, of course, for being an internet meme because he's the one that played Adolf Hitler in Downfall. Adolf Spain! Honest von his friend! Yeah, I thought he looked familiar when I saw his IMDb photo. I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, Downfall. Just put a mustache on him, and there he goes. Isabel, forgive me if I mispronounce this last name, Adjani played Lucy, and I thought she did a pretty good job. I mean, she's restrained throughout most of the film. She does have a couple moments where she does get a little energetic, because like the original film, it has that little subplot about Lucy sensing that her husband's in danger. Now, they don't carry it to the same degree as the previous film where she does the whole sleepwalking thing, like how she did it there. But you can tell that people are worried about her, and she is a little hysterical. And given what her husband's going through, she has a right to be. Now, they do make the story between Lucy and Dracula a little bit better than the first film, where they actually meet before their fateful night in the room. But it was because Dracula goes and talks with her and is like, I can help your husband. Give me love. No. And then the next scene we see is the famous scene, or Herzog's recreation of the famous scene, minus one thing, which I will address later. Walter Leydengast played Van Helsing. I just briefly went through his IMDb credits. He wasn't anything big I recognized, but he had a prolific career. This is one of his later films, and he passed away within the decade after this film, so it's a pretty good high note to go off on. Roland Topper played Renfield, and he did a pretty good job. He's not as memorable as the 31 Dracula Renfield, or even as memorable as Dracula 10 Loving Hits Renfield, but he is still crazy and memorable in his own way. And apparently Herzog cast him because he saw him on French TV and he was impressed by his crazy laughter. And apparently that's one of the only things that the English stuff improves on, because his crazy laugh is a little bit more obvious. Maybe he was more energetic during that English take, or maybe when he's speaking English, she could carry his crazy laugh a little bit more. My guess is probably it's the take, because it's a laugh. It's not really going to be dubbed differently. Now, the film required thousands of gray rats to be used, and obviously with the amount they're going to need, they couldn't find a lot of them, so they painted white ones gray, and they also made sure that they were fixed so they wouldn't have any issues. Of course, this still led to some complaints by animal rights activists, because they said that the rats were put in a condition to where they had to begin eating each other because they were malnourished. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but if it's true, that's bad form on them. Now, another little funny thing is that apparently when they were shipping the rats in, the customs inspector fainted when he opened one of the boxes and saw the contents. I can just imagine that. Oh, what's that noise? Is there going to be some rats in here? Rats! Then they start a musical number inside the box. Yes, we're rats. We're rats. We're furry and forlorn. Let's see how many people get that joke. The film is a good example of the long take working. Like, there's a couple acting scenes that have long takes. And then a lot of the establishing and traveling shots are long takes. Like when Harker is going through the wilderness on his way to Dracula's castle, there's a lot of long takes showing off the countryside. And then the boats, when we see the boat out at sea, there's a lot of long takes, which is good because it's good from a cinematography standpoint, but it also helps bog the film's pace down a tad at times. Now, from what I learned in cinema literature, because during the first year I took it, we watched this film. That is part of the European style of filmmaking. I don't know all what my teacher meant by that, but I guess it's the European approach to doing a film is a lot different than how they would approach a film from the American standpoint. Just different sensibilities, different film techniques. Not a lot in that regard, but film techniques from how you pace a film, how you edit a film, maybe a little bit how you shoot a film, but not so mainly that. Just a different flair. And since Herzog is a German director, he's going to come from that standpoint, even if he is producing a version of the film for an American audience. They just might not appreciate it as much. But on that thing, since I am American with American sensibilities, I will say it does bog the film down a little bit, but I could still appreciate those parts of the films for their cinematic value. It's just that you probably could have cut the film down a little bit in its English version for a more American audience, because it does slow the pace down. It's not really, at least the version I watched. I don't know if it was an edited TV version. I didn't really notice that much blood. The music I liked. I think it fit the film a lot better than the music in the version of the original film I watched. That's kind of felt like church music compared to the score for this film. Like I mentioned, Herzog's cinematography, how he gets a camera set up, is excellent. I think he wrote the film pretty well, like I've said. The acting, great. Klaus Kinski apparently did behave during the makeup sessions, because if you know anything about that actor, you know about his outrageous behavior. He was very patient and had a good relationship with the makeup artist Reiko Crook. And outside of that, though, typical Klinsky, as Herzog has stated, the rats were better behaved by comparison. That's not a direct quote, but that is a paraphrase. Funny thing is that this is not Klinsky's first Dracula film, because he previously played Renfield in the Franco Count Dracula film, where Christopher Lee played Dracula, actually with the mustache and all that. He played Renfield, and he had no line, just ah, ah, ah. That's why I want to look that film up now to see how Klinsky did in that role. Now, the film has more or less the same ending as the original film, so if you know the original film, you know he vanished into dust. That's the only major difference there. He doesn't vanish into dust. He just dies for some reason. And the way that Klinsky plays it off, it's weird. It's like he's having a seizure because of the sun. I'm allergic to sunlight. Which, watching that, I couldn't help but chuckle a little bit, because it's like, what? And then they basically have Van Helsing kill him like a traditional vampire film. Stake him! Well, actually, kill him might be a little bit too strong, because he's probably already dead from the sunlight, but finish him off. And then he is taken into custody by the authorities at the behests of Harker. And the plot twist is Harker turns into a vampire in this version. Now, when I first saw that, I'm like, wow, I was not expecting that. And that's a pretty good ending. Because I figured that Herzog knew that he had to do something different for the ending, because even though it's a remake of a classic film, if he did that same ending 100%, it might not fly as well. So having Jonathan become a vampire, I think it works. Now, it is a little bit of a downbeat ending, especially since Lucy sacrifices herself. So it's like, she sacrificed herself in vain, and the surviving people are still going to die of the plague. Because the film does still have that whole little plague subplot. It is developed a lot better in this one than the original one, because the original one, you see scenes that do kind of let you know that the plague is there, or at least Nosferatu is there with the rats to make it seem like it's the plague, like the scene where they're marching the coffins. There's a lot more scenes of that here, and there's one scene that was very dark, in an almost dark comedic sense, where this one family is having dinner outside, and it's basically them saying it's their last meal, because they know they're probably going to die from the plague. Just looking at that, it's like, ooh, that's ominous, but at least they're saying, okay, they're going to give in to their fate. Would I recommend the film if you are a fan of horror? Yes, but just know that it is a little slow in the tooth at times. And if you could track down the German version with subtitles, that'd probably be more my recommendation, even though I haven't seen it. Mainly because the director says the performances are more authentic, and if you can get the same pacing and all that with better acting, go for it. I know the English version, which I found this out after the fact, is on YouTube. That's not where I watched it. I just found that out because I was looking to see if there was a better version of the original film on there, which I found out after the fact there was, and it's like, I could have just watched the one on YouTube instead of watching the one on Amazon, and it would have looked a lot better. So if you want to try to marathon both films, they're both on YouTube for now. So go ahead. Probably in a couple years, but that information is going to be outdated, but hey, sometimes it's